You lied to everyone and you signed their names." Marlene's hand trembled as she pressed the phone to the table, its tinny recording of her grandmother's voice echoing in the hush. "Do you want to hear it again, or will you finally admit it?" Her aunt's drawn face split into a sneer, but her uncle stepped forward, his lips barely moving. "That recording isn't legal, you're grasping." Marlene's knuckles white. "It's your voice, you can try." Her uncle cut her off, voice cracking. "Turn it off, Marlene. You don't get to use that." The rain battered the courthouse window behind them. "Read what you signed," Marlene snapped, sliding the envelope across. "That paper fixes what you broke." The silence thickened, broken only by her son's sharp breath. "Say their names," Marlene whispered, staring down her uncle. "Look them in the eyes and say what you did." Her uncle looked away. But months earlier, before any of them stood in that courtroom, Marlene had less than $45, a frightened son, and nothing but a crumbling farmhouse no one wanted. Marlene counted her last $44.323 different times as the battered Corolla rattled through Androscoggin County, the digital numbers burning on her phone like a countdown. Cold rain slashed the windshield, beads of water chasing each other across the glass. She glanced at the empty McDonald's cup in the holder, then at the backseat. Two suitcases bulging with thrift store clothes and the worn blue backpack pressed against the door by a small, curled-up boy. "Mom," Ben's voice was a whisper, muffled by the jacket bunched around his knees. He was 7, narrow-faced with a cowlick that wilted in the damp. "Is this really Grandma Annie's house?" He stared out as they passed a rotting mailbox leaning into the dark, a peeling sign half buried in dead leaves. "I think so," Marlene said, forcing the words to be steady. The cold seeped through her jeans. "It was hers for a long time, honey." She tried to smile in the mirror. "We'll just check it out." Ben pressed his face to the glass, voice quiet. "It doesn't look like anyone lives here." She squeezed the wheel, pulling the car into a shallow ditch beside the gate. "I know," she murmured, "but it's ours, sort of." She remembered the funeral, her Aunt Valerie's perfume sharp and bitter in the parlor air, Uncle Rick's voice too loud as he turned to the room. "You're giving Marlene that dump," Valerie had cackled, eyes never meeting Marlene S. "It's not even safe to park there, you see those support beams." Rick dropped the keys with a mock flourish. "All yours, Marlene, good luck not falling through the porch." Her cousin Amy bit into a sandwich, snorted, "Maybe you'll find a squirrel or two willing to share the place." They'd all laughed. Only Ben watched Marlene, his hand finding hers, thumb rubbing a nervous circle. Marlene felt her jaw tighten, recalling Valerie's smug aside as the will was read. "You know, Rick tried to fix that place up once, but I suppose bad luck never did let go of those who cross Annie Caldwell." Now, rain thudding on the roof, Marlene peered at the chain gate, the faded turquoise peeling in strips. The farmhouse looming beyond was nearly black in the gray morning, windows boarded, the roofline sinking toward the skeletal pines. A rusty tin shed hunched beside the house, its door chain tight. She lifted the latch, boots squelching in the muddy yard as Ben dragged his backpack. Inside the gate, something caught her eye, a worn wooden sign, dirt-smudged letters visible beneath a smear of moss, Caldwell, 1913. She hesitated, heart jolting. Had anyone from the family cared about this place at all? Ben, still hugging his backpack, blinked up at her. "Can we go in, Mom? My feet are cold." Marlene had to swallow before answering, "Yeah, let's see what Grandma left us." If you've ever watched people you trust turn their backs and wondered what secrets they're hiding, don't turn away. The truth had teeth, and tonight, Marlene was about to feel it bite. "Don't wander," Marlene said, pushing on the warped porch boards, each step testing the wood. Ben lingered at the cement blocks beneath the stairs. "What's that, Mom? There's a door down here, kind of." Marlene bent, brushing away leaves to see a rusted, padlocked hatch half sunk into the mud. "Maybe it's just an old root cellar," she muttered, kneeling beside him. She remembered her father muttering about numbers, keys, and stubborn locks, words tumbling out when she was barely 10, half asleep on Christmas Eve. Ben knelt, squinting. "Is there anything inside? Why's it locked?" Marlene shrugged, unsure. "Maybe we'll find out." She rapped the metal, hollow with a hint of something beneath. Hook 2 appeared as she fished in her pocket, hand finding the ancient key her grandmother had pressed into her palm in the hospital, eyes fierce for a moment despite the morphine haze. The memory made Marlene's skin prickle. She fit the key in. The lock crunched open for the first time in years. Inside the shed, dust billowed in a choking cloud. A rickety workbench, shelves lined with jam jars. At the far end, another hatch, a faded red X painted on the planks. Marlene's hand trembled. "Ben, stay close, okay?" Hook 3, she pried up the hatch and coughed as musty air rolled out. A narrow stair descended into darkness, older than the house itself by the look of the stones. Ben hesitated, then followed as she clicked on her phone flashlight. Down there the air tasted of metal and mold. On the dirt floor lay a battered metal box embossed with her mother's initials. She knelt, heart pounding, and flicked the latch. Inside, a stack of brittle papers and a slender book tied with string. She thumbed through the book, her mother's looping handwriting filling every page. The first word stopped Marlene cold. "If you're reading this, you know the rest of them never deserved the house. But I had to put their names on the papers because of what Rick did to your father." A sharp breath, Ben leaned over her shoulder. "What's it say, Mom?" "It's a journal," Marlene whispered, blinking. "It's everything." She scanned the first entry. "Rick forged the new loan documents after your father paid it off. I have proof. You'll find it with this letter." Her mother warned, "He won't let it go, and the shed, don't let Rick get his hands on it. If you can, forgive me for waiting so long." Beneath the journal, a cassette tape in a stained baggie. A label read, "Annie Rec. April '98. Marlene's heart stuttered. Tucking everything into her jacket, she squeezed Ben's hand and hurried out, footsteps echoing back against the cold stone. Outside, the rain had faded to a drizzle. Marlene locked eyes with her son. "We need to talk to someone who knows what this all means." His small mouth pressed tight. Ben nodded. The secret was bigger than she'd feared. The local lawyer's office felt as ancient as the house, linoleum cracked, wood paneling warped by damp. The secretary's glasses magnified her eyes until they looked like novelty marbles. Marlene managed, "Is Mr. Sheffard in?" "He's between appointments," the woman muttered, looking at Ben as if the boy might track mud across her soul. "Name?" "Caldwell," Marlene replied, hand tight on Ben's small wrist. "Marlene Caldwell." Her ally arrived in scuffed loafers. A man who'd known her mother in high school, wore old ties, and smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass. "Come in," Jack Sheffard said, voice calm. "What brings you here, Marlene?" She ducked her head, pulling out the taped journal and cassette. "My aunt and uncle Rick and Valerie, they said the house was worthless, but I found this. My mother wrote that the original mortgage was paid off, and there's a recording. She said Rick forged new deeds." Jack's eyebrows shot up. He thumbed carefully through pages, lips moving. "That's your mother's handwriting, and if this is what I think, your uncle committed a significant fraud." Ben looked between them, chewing his lip. "Will we have to leave?" Jack squatted to Ben's eye level. "That's the question, isn't it? But here's the bigger problem, statute of limitations. You've got maybe 3 weeks before this is all dust. If we move now, you might have a case, but it could get ugly fast." Marlene's voice was a thin thread. "What happens if Rick finds out?" Jack's answer was blunt. "He'll fight. He always was a stubborn bastard." They set to work, scanning pages, copying the handwritten notes, making digital recordings of the cassette. Jack arranged for a voice print analysis. He knew a forensic tech 2 towns over. He looked Marlene in the eyes, voice soft. "If you're ready to fight, I'll back you, but I need you to know Rick's threatened people before. Are you up for this?" "I have to be," Marlene said, voice steel under fatigue. "He took everything from my dad from us. I'm not turning away now." Outside the office, thunder rolled. The clock started ticking down. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed for long. 3 days in, as Marlene and Ben worked at the farmhouse restoring the water line, a battered pickup bounced up the drive. Rick, red-faced and reeking of bourbon, leaned out the window. "You poking around in there, Marlene?" he called, voice slicing through the crisp air. "Better be careful what you dig up. Some things are best left under the mud." He spat to the side. Valerie coiled beside him with a pack of menthols, glare sharp enough to skin a fish. Marlene stood her ground, Ben pressed tight to her leg. "We're just cleaning up. What's it to you, Rick?" His jaw tightened. "It's still my name on those papers." Marlene retorted, "Is it now? Sure about that." Valerie barked a harsh laugh, flicked her lighter with shaking fingers. "You don't want to mess with us, girl. You never were good at keeping quiet." Hook 5 hit as Marlene pulled out her phone. "Smile for the camera," she said, snapping a picture of Rick's hand gripping the steering wheel, a faded tattoo visible. "Everything's going in the file." The bluff bought her space. Rick's face blanched, Valerie cursed, punching the dashboard. That night, safe inside, Marlene read further. The scope of Rick's actions sprawled wider, additional properties listed under shell companies, forged checks, names of relatives scrawled across legal forms. Amy's signature appeared, but Marlene remembered Amy's dyslexia. She could barely write her own last name, much less sign 3 forms perfectly. A nuclear option lay before Marlene, a second cassette labeled Confession, Deck 2002. In clear, grim tones, Rick admitted to Annie, "They'll never trace it unless you talk." Annie's reply was faint. "I taped you, Rick," she said. "If you touch Marlene's share, this goes to Shepard." Rick's voice, too calm, "No one will ever believe a dead woman." Marlene's hands shook as the truth crystallized. Days ticked by. Marlene and Ben mapped out documentation, learning to use Shepard's ancient scanner, stashing digital copies in 3 online drives. She called Shepard nightly, voices pressed tight with urgency. Ben practiced spelling names for statements, his small shoulders set with resolve he shouldn't have needed at that age. One night, with the statute glare narrowing, 2 weeks left, Shepard met Marlene in the B&B parlor where he sometimes picked up extra business. Over peppermint tea, they marshaled the final plan. "I think we go public," Marlene said, staring at the files. "He's not going to back down, but I won't see Ben lose this place or my mother's name dragged again." Jack sipped, brow furrowed. "You want mercy or revenge?" Marlene looked at her sleeping son on the couch, the hope in his furrowed brow. "I want my family name back, and I want them to fear something for once." Jack nodded, mouth grim. "Tomorrow, courthouse steps. I'll have an agreement ready, revocation of Rick's claims, title transfer, and a little public embarrassment to taste." The morning of the battle was clear. Cold snapped at Marlene's hands as she donned her only clean button-down. Ben wore his birthday sweater, hair slicked from a nervous comb. Jack walked ahead, files bundled under his arm, the courthouse looming like a rising wave. They entered the wood-paneled chambers. Rick and Valerie hunched at the table, Amy hovering like a ghost at their backs. The judge, a hawkish woman, eyed each of them with practiced suspicion. "Miss Caldwell," she invited, "what brings you here again?" Marlene stood, voice measured. "Evidence, Your Honor, and a confession I need the court to hear." Rick's jaw spasmed. "I want my lawyer," he blurted. Valerie hissed, "You're bluffing, there's nothing." Jack carefully placed the cassette on the table. Exhibit A, Confession of Rick Caldwell, dated 2002, signed by Mrs. Annie Caldwell as witness. Voice authentication available. Silence. The judge nodded briskly. "Play it." As the tape whirred, Rick's voice filled the room, low but unmistakable. "They'll never trace it unless you talk." Then Annie's soft retort and Rick's chilling denial. The clerk's pen stopped mid-stroke. Rick snarled, "That could be anyone. You can fake that." Jack replied, "We authenticated the voice print." Valerie stood. "This is a family matter. It never should have come this far." Marlene stared at them, every muscle aching with old wounds. She spoke only to Rick. "You lied to everyone, and you signed their names." Her hand trembled as she pressed the phone to the table, its screen glowing. "Do you want to hear it again, or will you finally admit it?" Valerie's sneer, the same as at the funeral, did not waver. "That recording isn't legal, you're grasping." Rick's lips barely moved. "Turn it off, Marlene, you don't get to use that." Marlene's knuckles whitened as she held the phone steady. Rain battered the courthouse window behind them, echoing like a memory of that first day. The faces in the room blurred, the only ones she could see were Ben's, anxious, stubborn, and her mother's, forever locked in faded Polaroids. "Read what you signed," Marlene said, sliding the manila envelope across the table. Inside, the agreement Jack had drawn up: Rick's formal withdrawal of all claims, restitution of proceeds, public admission of wrongdoing to be entered into record. "That paper fixes what you broke," she finished, steady now. Even Amy watched, her arms crossed defensively, saying nothing for once. Rick's hand fluttered over the papers. "If I sign this, I lose everything," he whispered. "You stole everything," Marlene replied, voice flat. "You look my son in the eyes and tell him why." Ben's voice piped up, true and clear. "You took our home, Uncle Rick." For a moment no one moved. Then, defeated, Rick scratched his signature, the ink shaky but legible. The silence thickened, broken only by Ben's sharp breath. Marlene leaned close, gaze unflinching. "Say their names, look them in the eyes, and say what you did." Rick looked away, shoulders curling. The judge's gavel came down twice, the clerk noting in bold, "Caldwell versus Caldwell, withdrawal of claim approved, damages awarded." That rotten house with its haunted cellar would never be just a ruin again. Rick and Valerie faded from view, faces gray, as news spread, family theft, exposed audio, signatures laid bare. Neither would walk into a Lewiston grocery without whispers now. They kept their distance, ashamed, the story echoing in every creak of the farmhouse boards. Jack clasped Marlene's hand. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave your mother's name back." Ben smiled, the first real smile in weeks. Marlene bought back the strip of land Rick had quietly sold during the feud, returning the acreage to what it once was. She spent the following spring scrubbing the porch, teaching Ben to hammer old boards, planting tulips in the ragged soil. By late June, the old farmhouse groaned with new life, fresh paint, repaired windows, scents of cinnamon bread drifting through open doors. The battered sign on the gate gleamed beneath a new coat: Caldwell B&B. Passing motorists followed, fresh flyers, drawn by the legend of an old house saved from ruin, a family made whole again through grit and an unwillingness to forget. No one called Marlene's home a dump anymore. It's not always the person shouting loudest who owns the truth. Sometimes, justice isn't a courtroom verdict, it's seeing your child sleep soundly under your roof, all secrets finally aired. Ben's bedtime question echoed from those hard months, softer now. "We're home, right, Mom?" Marlene squeezed his hand, her own heart steady at last. "Yeah, honey, we're home." Family can be the sharpest wound, but when you refuse to let someone else write your ending, that scar becomes a map. And for some, that's where survival truly begins. If you've ever had to rebuild from ashes others left for you, maybe you know the past only rules you if you let it. That July, dawn fractured through thin curtains and spilled over cherrywood floors that hadn't been this clean in decades. Birds bickered in the firs out front, their calls sharp and bright. Marlene, still in her paint-stained pajamas, padded toward the kitchen, replaying every detail of the past year. The court, the tapes, the weight lifted off her shoulders as Rick and Valerie had slunk away, stumbling through the parking lot and out of her life for good. The farmhouse stood tall again, new old boards blending with the ones Ben had helped her scrub and sand. She thought of the day she'd held out her hand to a boy who'd lost faith in quiet places, and realized she'd done the same for herself. Ben sat at the table, coloring in a pad of thick paper, his legs swinging in time with some secret music. A half-eaten bagel perched beside him. He glanced up, a smudge of strawberry jam on his lip. "Can we go to the creek after breakfast? I want to find more of those flat rocks for the garden." Marlene grinned, ruffling his hair as she passed. "Sure, as long as the kitchen stays in one piece while I'm gone." Ben peered at her, eyes shrewd for 7. "Can we invite Amy?" Marlene stilled, fingers tightening around the coffee pot. She hadn't expected to hear her cousin's name. Amy had turned up sometimes, quietly without Rick and Valerie, arms wrapped tight around her chest. When the news broke, Amy sent a letter, not apology, not excuse, just 3 lines: "I didn't know I should have. Can I help fix it?" Ben waited, patient as only a child who'd witnessed grown-ups at their worst could be. Maybe, Marlene said slowly. We can ask her, she's trying, I think. He nodded solemn. It's good when people try again. Later, out at the creek, the sun dappled the mossy stones. Amy met them under the shade of an old maple, her shoulders hunched in a faded hoodie. Hey Ben, she said, voice shy, catch any frogs yet? Two, Ben said with pride, uncurling his fist just enough to reveal a slick green thigh. You want to name one? Amy's smile was crooked, uncertain. She crouched beside him. Only if you let it go after, it's better that way, right? Ben looked to Marlene. She gave a small nod, and as the frog vaulted away, Amy's eyes lifted, uncertain. Her gaze flicked to Marlene. Thanks for letting me come, she said. Behind her words was the weight of years, jokes at funerals, looks across Thanksgiving tables, the silence when Annie's name was mentioned too often. Things at Dad's are they're a mess, but I got a job down at the co-op. That's something. Marlene nodded, letting her guard drop an inch. You want to come by for supper? I was thinking of making that lemon chicken Grandma Annie liked. Amy looked up sharply, her freckles drawing into focus in the sunlight. Really? I'd like that a lot. Her voice shook and she pressed her sleeves over trembling fingers. I'm sorry, she said finally, blurting it like a secret, for looking away. Marlene felt heat prick her eyes. For all that had passed between their parents, there were some wounds that only time, patience, and awkward family dinners might heal. Thank you for saying so, she replied, her voice gentle. That's the first step. Little by little, word spread that the Caldwell house was open again, an old farmhouse with creaky floors and stories printed on worn wallpaper. The first guests were a couple from Bangor, city folk in search of authentic countryside. They praised the lemonade, left a generous tip, and snapped pictures on the porch bench. More followed, retirees tracing genealogy, families on road trips, writers in search of summer quiet. On Thursdays, Jack Sheffard came by after his office hours. He'd stand in the kitchen sipping burnt coffee, watching Ben feed crusts to the fat brown hen now roosting beneath the lilac bushes. You ever picture it this way? Jack asked one twilight, leaning against the counter as Marlene grated lemon zest for cake. She considered, some of it. I dreamed about justice, not chickens, she said wryly, glancing at the hen pecking at Ben's shoes. Jack laughed deep and satisfied. You got them both, that's rare. Not by accident, she replied, lowering her voice. There was a part of me that wanted to smash something, but I guess I wanted to build more. There were moments, not many, but enough to notice, when the past seemed softened at the corners. Marlene would find herself standing by the cellar stairs, hearing echoes of her mother's laughter. Ben would call, Mom, come see, and she'd startle out of her reverie. Sometimes Rick tried to call. The first time she pressed decline before the phone finished vibrating. After the third attempt, she blocked his number. Valerie never bothered. Amy, though, arrived each Sunday with blueberry pie and tabloid gossip, learning to cook in Marlene's cramped kitchen. Marlene's bitterness faded in increments, like muddy water clearing after a storm. She caught herself singing as she swept or planting marigolds with Ben at dusk. The house, once hollow with old pain, now held laughter and the clatter of cutlery and the gentle hush of pages turning under Ben's reading lamp each night. One wind-bright evening, as fireflies sparked above the back garden, Marlene walked out to the edge of the yard where the woods pressed close. She held her mother's journal, the pages soft with age. She read the closing lines again. Forgive what I couldn't fix, Marlene. If you find your way back, let the house keep you whole. I hope you remember that courage is its own inheritance. Marlene let the words settle. She glanced toward the porch where Ben, barefoot, wild-haired, danced to music only he could hear, Amy clapping along. She closed the journal, pressing her palm against the cover as if to say, I kept your promise. I found the truth. There were rough days, of course. Leaks in the roof that seemed to breed in new places overnight. a pipe that burst under the kitchen sink, flooding the floor just as the breakfast guests arrived. Days when loneliness threatened to creep in if she let herself pause too long. But with every repair, every hard-won piece of laughter, the old wounds faded further. "Do you miss it?" Ben asked her one night as thunder swept the sky, the farmhouse windows rattling in their frames. "Miss what, honey?" "The way things were, when it was just you and me and we didn't have to talk to anybody else." Marlene thought for a moment. Sometimes, she admitted, it was quieter, but that wasn't really living, it was just waiting. Ben curled against her side, warm and solid. "Are we done waiting now?" She stroked his cowlick, smiling into the dark. "Yeah, we're living. That's what Grandma Annie wanted for us, I think." He nodded, satisfied. "Good." August brought a letter with no return address, written in Rick's cramped block letters. "Marlene, you got the better of me, fine, but don't think I never loved that place. I just didn't know how to be the one who lost, take care of Amy, keep Ben away from the pond in rain." Marlene read it twice, the words bone-heavy. She passed it to Amy, who read in silence, tears glistening at her lashes, then tucked it beneath the butter dish. Summer waned, cool nights crisping the air. The B&B bookings stretched well into fall. Guests came for leaf season, asking about the scandal with high voices and barely hidden interest. Marlene learned to laugh, to offer the abridged version, careful not to give away what still hurt. On Ben's 8th birthday, the house brimmed with neighbors and friends. Jack brought pie, Amy stacked gifts by the window, and Mrs. Foreman from 2 farms over carried in an apple cake so heavy Marlene feared it would break the table. Light poured through every open door, the rooms echoing with a noise that sounded finally like home. After everyone had gone and the candles were down to nubs, Ben wandered out to the porch, a glow stick looped loosely around his neck. Marlene followed, settling beside him as crickets chirped in the dark. "Magic still lives here, huh?" Ben murmured, peering into the glow, "even with all the grown-up stuff." Marlene nudged him with her shoulder. "It was always here, we just had to dig a little." He thought this over. Does that mean what Uncle Rick did, it can stay gone? She let her gaze rest on the rebuilt archway, the fixed gutters, the garden beds bursting with color. It means that pain doesn't get to be the only story. This house remembers other things too, your laughter, our hard work, Grandma Annie's good parts. She left us more than trouble, you know. Ben grinned, teeth bright in the half-light. "Then I'm gonna make even more memories, like 1,000. Marlene ruffled his head, heart full. "Let's start tomorrow, then." The next month spun on in steady, ordinary rhythms. A school backpack by the door, muddy paw prints from the neighbor's dog, the mailbox full of bills and thank yous, overdue library books, and a homemade card from Amy. Heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they fix old houses and forgive old hurts. Autumn brought a quilt pattern of maple leaves, fiery against the field. One Saturday in October, Marlene stood under the Caldwell sign, fresh gold letters gleaming after another painting session. Jack set down his coffee on the fence post, smiling as Ben raced across the gravel drive. Jack nodded at the gate. "Looks better than it did. The county's talking about putting you on the Heritage Tour next year, you know." "You kidding?" "About 10,000 strangers looking for ghost stories. You up for that?" Marlene laughed, really laughed, full throat, no fear behind it. "If they want stories, we've got a few left." Jack watched her, thoughtful. "You ever want to write them down, not just for court, but for yourself, for Ben, for whoever needs to believe a place can be saved?" She hesitated, a flush rising to her cheeks. "I might. There's a lot that can't fit on a pamphlet. Some of it I'm still living." Jack smiled wryly. "Best stories always are." That night, after closing up, windows latched against the first real frost, Marlene sat at the scuffed kitchen table, an old notepad and pen in hand. She wrote with halting starts and stops. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was stubbornness passed down, heartbreak, hope, and stubborn joy. If you find yourself here, lost or rebuilding, remember, don't turn away from the truth, not even when it hurts. It's yours, and what you do with it matters. She left the pages tucked inside her mother's journal on the mantel, where any Caldwell, or anyone else, needing courage might one day find them. Outside, the wind thudded against the old siding, but Marlene heard only the hush of peace settling through the boards. The farmhouse, once a battlefield, had become against all odds a home. And as dawn broke over dew-soaked fields and footsteps scuffed down the hall, Marlene understood. The past could haunt or it could heal, but today belonged to her and to Ben and to everyone who kept on trying. She touched the old sign at the gate, felt the rough wood beneath her palm, and whispered the family name, a promise and an absolution. Caldwell. Still standing, still home, always. In the months that followed, word of the Caldwell house settled into town memory not as scandal, but as a parable, told at the diner over mugs gone cold, retold by teachers when a child asked why that blue farmhouse on Route 17 had a charm nailed to the porch. Marlene found herself, improbably, at the center of something both smaller and deeper than she dared hope. Neighbors dropped in with hand-me-down curtains, berry pies, or stories about Annie's raspberry jam, each one stitching her tighter to this little place. One Friday afternoon, Ben bounded into the kitchen waving a folded flyer. The library's doing a Stories of Old Lewiston contest. Mrs. Price says you have to enter. We could tell about the ghosts in our cellar. Marlene laughed, shaking flour from her hands. I'm not sure they're ready for our particular ghosts, Ben. He plunked himself onto a stool, grinning. Do it anyway. You said it matters telling things true even when it hurts. He mimicked her serious voice, the memory rising up between them. Besides, you promised more stories. She ruffled his hair. You're right, maybe we can write it together, your version and mine. Ben's eye went wide. Can we write about the secret frogs too? The frogs, the leaky roof, the time Amy set the oven mitt on fire by accident, let's write it all. She smiled, the kind of deep, tired, unhurried smile that took years to practice. Maybe that's the real magic. Amy came by for supper, hauling a battered casserole and news of her latest shift at the co-op. She set the dish down, eyes glancing from Marlene to Ben. Do you think, she said, hesitant, maybe I could help with the library story? I could talk about the way Annie used to make us string popcorn for the birds. Marlene's voice softened. I'd like that, Amy, truth's better shared. Afterward, with the kitchen warm and windows fogged, they sat scribbling, erasing, telling it all. Bit by bit, the story unwound, not just of loss or betrayal, but of mending, forgiveness, and the stubbornness to build home again, no matter how many times life tried to wash it away. Ben leaned his head against Marlene's shoulder. Our turn to write things down, he murmured, words drifting like moths toward lamplight. Marlene nodded, her heart quiet and whole. Yes, Ben, it's ours now, all of it.